Good afternoon, everyone. This is your host, Hemant Prasad, for today's webinar. The topic we have for today is migrating from Oracle to MariaDB Enterprise. Thanks a lot for taking your time out. I hope everyone had a good lunch. Before joining the webinar, I have with me Fred Sim, Regional Director, Asia Pacific from MariaDB Corporation, who will walk us through about the product portfolio of MariaDB, as well as Faisal Said, Senior Solution Engineer from MariaDB Corporation as well, who will walk us through the roadmap and the path to migrate Oracle databases, the expensive Oracle databases to MariaDB Enterprise, and the values that you can get, with the migration. So thanks a lot once again. I'll start this presentation during this 1 hour webinar. We will have a poll. So if you can see on your screen, in the bottom, you should be able to see an icon for the polls. Feel free to spend some time and answer some of the questions in the polls, as well as we will have a survey post webinar. So we'll appreciate if you can also provide some inputs in the survey. So we will start with a quick introduction about my company, Crash Info Solutions, which I represent. We are a leading MariaDB partner in the region since 5 years now. Basically having a dedicated team of MariaDB certified DBAs based in Singapore, Malaysia, as well as serving customers in Hong Kong and the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, as well as India and South Africa. Our focus is around delivering open source solutions in different platforms. MariaDB, of course, is one of our key offering. And our team has also got strong experience on delivering or migrating Oracle databases to MariaDB and saving a lot of cost for our customers in this region. Some of the partners we work with other than MariaDB are like AlphaScore for content management, workflow, BPM. Also, we work with GitHub, Fasu, as well as for AWS for cloud deployments. So that's a bit of introduction about our company that I represent, Crash Info Solutions. Just a reminder again, feel free to provide your inputs in the polls on your screen if you can see an icon, and also the survey after that. And in the end, we will flash our contact details as well. So if you want to know more about the migration path and possibly have a proof of concept as well, we'll be happy to talk more and have a session with you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Fred. He'll walk you through the solution presentation of MariaDB and different offerings that MariaDB has. Over to you, Fred.
Thank you, Herman. Good afternoon to most. I presume you guys are in the afternoon already. If not, good morning to the rest. My name is Fred Sim. I'm the Regional Director for Asia Pacific. I'll talk a little bit about MariaDB as a product before we jump into more details or technical details with regards to MariaDB and probably the interest of today, which is basically what you're going to be listening to, how to migrate from the likes of Oracle to MariaDB. Okay, I'll start by sharing a little bit of an insight with you, especially why a lot of customers and a lot of users are moving to open source. If you have not seen this report by Gartner, which was done a couple of years ago, there is a prediction that 70% of in-house application will be actually on open source, right? That primarily will be open source databases, and 50% of existing one will actually move to open source. That's, if you really think about it, that's huge. That is a lot of databases that will be moving to open source. And this is a reason why there is a huge movement, especially in the IT field, where every day, literally, there are databases coming up into the market. However, all said and done, if you look at the reliability and the historical reliance on database like MariaDB, there is a big market share, which I will share a little bit later with you. Next slide. This is where our inheritance actually came from. Monty, or Michael Widenius, as some of you may know him, he was actually the person who actually wrote MySQL. That is almost, I would say, almost 30 years ago when this started. With that open source base, he also created MariaDB, right? That gives you a lot of so-called tested and proven ground for database to be extremely reliable, extremely credible in terms of its usage. Imagine 30 years of development, enhancement, and fixes has all gone into, and where now MariaDB is being developed to actually make database, especially open source database, becoming more and more enterprise ready. So we are actually in reality competing with the likes of Oracle, DB2, Microsoft SQL, and so on. So if you think about it, having an open source in this area is really, really good for everyone, especially the community, in the IT community, and also for most companies who are adopting technology. Moving next. So thinking about where MariaDB originates, it is not only from MariaDB where innovation is actually coming from. I'm sure most of you might be familiar with some of these companies. I think if you have not seen them, they are generally the guys who have been providing some of the, I would say, the biggest IT services to every users on mobile phones or on laptops and so on, from the likes of Google to Facebook, from the likes of Alibaba to Tencent, just in case you're not familiar with them. Some of you may be interested to know why is DBS as a bank is in there as part of the technology contributors. And the reason behind it is because DBS actually requested for MariaDB to develop a compatibility layer for Oracle, which is absolutely interesting, and I would say to a certain extent leading edge when it comes to open source. That enables customer to literally move from Oracle to MariaDB with, I would say, minimal amount of work, right? Where a lot of the compatibility layer actually addresses that move. And again, I would say that for those of you who are interested, please let us know. I mean, that's what today's webinar is all about. And we'll go into more details, especially Faisal will be talking about it later. Next. All right, I think this is another very important slide people should be aware of. Open source has a lot of players, and I would say if you think about it on the left-hand side of the screen, I think most of you will be familiar with all the Linux distribution. 99% of all the Linux distribution today actually uses MariaDB or has MariaDB in the repository. And the reason why is because many of them has discontinued using MySQL because MySQL has been bought over by Oracle. So in taking caution of that, MariaDB has been very much prominent in the adoption, especially in the open source space, for anyone who is using open source operating systems like the ones you see in here. Very similarly, also for the cloud service, if you see the ones on the right, many of it may be familiar to you. I would say there are a lot more that actually offers MariaDB as a service, but MariaDB itself also has database as a service that we call SkySQL. So for those of you who might be interested, you can do a search for SkySQL and you can read more about it. Right. Next. Okay, so this is where I would say we have been climbing up in terms of recognition, especially in the open market, where MariaDB has been competing directly with some of these brand names that you see in here. We are only about 6 to 7 years old in terms of MariaDB itself, not accounting for MySQL. That gives us a lot of credibility to be able to climb up to 8th place in comparison to the likes of Oracle. MySQL is still one of the biggest open source, but they are slowly losing ground also. But for MariaDB to be, at such a recognized level is really great for us. And we make that known so that people have the confidence to adopt something that has been open source and where, it's fully supported, especially for organizations who want to adopt it in an enterprise way. Next. All right, we'll go into a little bit of a talk in terms of MariaDB solutions itself. MariaDB's database doesn't only take care of what we consider as OLTP, as some of you know it. We have a wide range of storage engines which kind of enables MariaDB to cater for different workloads. All right. Primarily in the center space, you have MariaDB with InnoDB as a storage engine. That is our general purpose database that most of you who has ever tried MariaDB might be familiar with this. It fits into probably 90+% of most of your requirements. But for customers who need something a little bit different, like for example, if they need to do analytics, okay, that's where we have Column Store, which uses columnar technology in order to cater for the workload where you probably will need to query millions or hundreds of millions of records, right? Also, we have the extreme scale of OLTP where probably customer might need the ability for them to do very high scale transactions. Like for example, a couple of 100,000 of writes per second and so on, especially for companies which are extremely large, has a lot of online presence. Like for example, Samsung, which is a customer of ours, uses it is because we can scale to the hundreds of thousands of users they have every single minute, right? So, and there are so many transactions of it that goes through their database. So if you look at it, our database solution with the different storage engine enables customers to address their different workloads as they need. Next. So for those of you who may be familiar, and I think those of you who are, I also came from Oracle. I understand, the value proposition that they're putting in place, but that has evolved over time. All right. When I say evolve, is very simple. Oracle has a lot of innovative technology for databases. I would say 5 to 10 years ago, where fundamentally they were the leader in this space. But because open source has actually gained so much momentum, those functionalities and features has also crept into places like MariaDB, right? And with that, what has happened is that we are now able to provide you with the same capability, but at a fraction of the cost of what probably you might pay Oracle for. For those of you who needs a document to understand this more, there is a link in this presentation. You can go in and read about it. Basically, this is how we work out to the different pricing, and especially when you talk about a total cost of ownership for 3 years, a difference between 100,000+ to 9 million is a lot of money, right? So I think justification to management is a lot easier if you can provide the similar capability in terms of high availability in comparison to what you're going to be paying for. Next. Yeah, this is another reason why anybody and everybody should start thinking about adoption. I'm going to talk a little bit about DBS Bank for those of you who are not familiar with it. DBS Bank is one of the larger banks, or the largest bank in Singapore, and one of the larger banks in Asia. They have businesses all around from China to Indonesia, and they have been nominated for the past 3 years as the best global bank, and also the most technology innovative bank in the world. All right, so that's good for them, and partially because one of the criteria is adoption of open source. When DBS Bank adopted MariaDB, now they have standardized MariaDB as the primary database in the bank. And because of this, they have been able to spend a lot more time and money innovating their services for customers instead of paying a lot of money in terms of pushing for enterprise databases like Oracle and so on, which, previously that's what they've been doing. So it's a move to actually reduce costs and also a move to innovate in terms of using technology to spearhead their banking capability and growth. Next, another customer that I'll talk about is Auto Europe. So they have moved to MariaDB, especially in their CMS, from Microsoft SQL Server. And this is important for them because not only have they been able to reduce costs, but they have, again, very similar requirement. They have been able to use that money and time to innovate on the capability in terms of extending their technology use while leveraging on open source like MariaDB, right? There's a lot more things to say, but what I want to also share is that there are also companies and banks in like Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on that has actually adopted what DBS has done, and Crest has been a primary partner for some of this migration. So they are a partner that you can reach out to if you are interested in doing migration. Next.
Well, yeah. Thank you very much, Fred, for sharing about the solution. To the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to actually put it in the Q&A. And a reminder again for the polls, or post it on the chat, and we will be happy to take your queries and answer at the end of webinar. Now, I think we will get into a bit of technical understanding of when we say, moving an elephant, to like an Oracle onto something like MariaDB, on how does it works, which are the tools and utilities available, what are the path, compatibility, etc. So I'll invite Faisal to actually take over from here and give us a deep dive into what the architecture of MariaDB is and what are the options available for customers to actually move away from Oracle platform onto MariaDB or adopt MariaDB for the new projects. So over to you, Faisal.
Hi, thank you, Hemant and Fred. Hey guys, welcome to this webinar. All right, so as you can see, I'm Faisal. I'm a solution engineer at MariaDB Corporation since 2018. And we are going to look at the migration process of migrating literally any database to MariaDB. And then, of course, we will go into some technical details, a bit of technical details on how to migrate, especially Oracle, to MariaDB database. So I think Fred has already given a very high level of what MariaDB is and how the storage engines are very essential components of the database. So if you look at the overall platform itself, like the MariaDB platform, you can see that it's not only the server and the storage engine, but it has so many other components to it. Like, for example, we have MaxScale, we have various JDBC connectors, Node.js connectors, ODBC connectors, and then of course we have Docker containers available for various MariaDB servers, and then of course we have Spark connectors, Java, Python APIs connectors available, and then we have streaming capabilities that basically you can stream your MariaDB data into a Kafka consumer, or maybe stream data from Kafka towards your column store or analytical database. So there are many various options and engines and solutions available within MariaDB itself. So in the next few slides, we are going to go through some of the technical details, or rather not really very technical, but some of the high level details of what those components are and why would you be interested in migrating to MariaDB from any database. That can be Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, or whatnot. Right. So moving forward, we are going to look at some of the features very quickly. As we already spoke, couple of slides ago that storage engine is basically one of the most important and most exciting part of a MariaDB ecosystem. So storage engine basically, what storage engine means, the storage engine basically can transform your database from an OLTP database to an analytical database. And then from an analytical database, it can transform your database to a very, very, very highly scalable OLTP engine, or it can transform your database into an in-memory storage, or it can give you the capability of accessing databases or accessing tables that are sitting in maybe in another database altogether, another server altogether. Like for example, it can be on MS SQL server, or it can be a table on Oracle database itself. So you can literally connect to any of those databases using the storage engines that are available. Spider is one of them. That we will talk about that in a bit of time. So storage engines, like we mentioned earlier, the storage engine basically have many different capabilities. So one of the most important one would be ACID compliance. So any secure environment where data is important, ACID compliant storage engines are a must. Like all the good databases should be ACID compliant. So when we talk about ACID compliance, we are basically talking about atomicity, that all the transactions are committed together or nothing is committed. Meaning if you have one transaction and you're doing a lot of different things within that transaction, if you want to roll back, then everything should roll back. And when you commit, everything should commit. So it's not going to be the case where you have a large transaction, but you partially commit something and partially roll back something. That's not going to happen. So that's A for atomicity. And then of course, C is for consistency and integrity, where MariaDB or the various engines that are available will make sure that your database is always consistent, and it basically protects the integrity of your database no matter what happens. Maybe your server crashes, your server powers down without a proper shutdown. Anything can happen, but your database will ensure that your database is in a consistent state at any given time. Isolation, I for isolation. So that's again something very, very important in any server or any environment where you have multi-user access to the database. Of course, all the modern applications that we see today are multi-user, of course, with thousands and thousands of users accessing the database at the same time. So various isolation levels available in MariaDB that can address different specific scenarios or specific use cases. So that's covered by I. And then of course, D is for data durability and dependability. So your data is always going to be protected by the engine itself. So there's never going to be a scenario where you lose some data due to power failure or something bad happens to your data. That's not going to happen. So all these things are basically ACID compliances, various compliances that all the good databases should have. And then of course, if you look at other options, some of the engines will basically give you the ability to lock the tables entirely, or some of the engines will give you ability to lock pages or even lock rows. So all the modern OLTP engines like InnoDB, MyRocks, and Expand and other modern engines, they will give you the option to lock your data by row level, so that multiple users can access the database without any contingencies or any sort of bottlenecks being created. And of course, some engines have special use cases. Like for example, some engines are basically provided to be able to support GIS. GIS stands for, of course, graphical and geometrical data points, so that can be stored in your GIS tables. And then of course, column store for your analytical workloads, right? So that's there. So on the left side, you see there's an example, very quick example. So it doesn't mean that when you create a table in one engine, you are going to stick with it forever. So depending on your use case or depending on the scenarios, you can always just simply alter table and then basically change the engine to a different engine, and then you immediately get the benefits and behavioral change for that particular engine. But of course, it's something that's not recommended to do directly in production environments. So you should always go through a proper life cycle of basically testing your change, and then seeing whether does this really fit your requirement, or does it create any of the unwanted side effects. So you have to be diligent do your test cases and regression and all that to make sure that whatever you change is not going to impact in anything negative. Looking at the various engines that are available by, or rather supported by MariaDB at the moment. So of course, we already know about InnoDB, InnoDB being the standard general purpose engine that's good for basically everything, meaning a bit of everything, but it's particularly good for your OLTP based transaction. It supports row level locking, of course. So that means that your multi-user experience can be very smooth. And then you have Myrox. Myrox is a very special use case or special engine that is being developed, that was being developed by Facebook, and Facebook uses Myrox for all of their MariaDB instances that are running in their Facebook cloud, basically. So this is particularly optimized for writing. So if you have a use case where you want to do a lot of writing, Myrox is a very good use case for that. It does data compression by default, and it's very, very efficient when writing the data, writing to that particular table. But of course, selection is also very fast, very efficient. Looking at column store, as we already talked about a little bit about it, column store is an analytical engine where it stores the data in columnar format. Is basically MPP architecture, uses massively parallel architectural engine. So meaning that no matter how many CPUs and how many nodes you give it, it can basically make use of all the CPUs, all the cores, and all the engine, all the processing power that you give it. So your queries and your complex analytical queries are processed in a fraction of time compared to any other engine out there, right? So it's very, very powerful when running complex queries against terabytes and terabytes of data. So column store is for that. Spider is also a very interesting engine where basically if you want to shard your data, right, shard your tables across multiple physical nodes in your infrastructure. So you can use Spider as a storage engine option. So Spider can basically literally have your table partitions sitting on different servers altogether. And then when you run a query from your Spider node, Spider will know where exactly is that data available, on which node is that data available. It will push that query down to that physical server, physical MariaDB server, and then it basically can read that shard in parallel, along with, of course, other queries that are running in your server. So Spider is great if you have a couple of tables that you want to shard or you want to partition across multiple database servers to get more processing power and more performance. So Spider is your use case. And Spider is also great if you want to connect to an external database, like let's say you want to connect to a table that is sitting in Oracle server, right? So you can use Spider. So this particular feature is recently introduced in 10.5 enterprise version, where Spider has a new capability that it can now talk to other databases like Oracle or SQL Server. These are especially good if you are doing migrations. So Spider engine can come in very handy when you can just simply connect to a table in Oracle server, and then just simply select data from there and insert into your local MariaDB, InnoDB table or Myrox table or whichever that may be. Moving forward to expand, as Fred mentioned, expand is literally the opposite of column store. So column store is the extreme end of OLTP requirements, OLTP workload requirements. Expand is basically the other extreme of column store is the OLAP extreme, while expand is the OLTP extreme. So if you have thousands and thousands of concurrent users that want to do millions and millions of transactions per second, expand is your use case. So or your storage engine. So it's currently in tech preview, which is available in 10.5 enterprise server and also in SkySQL. So it's not a production or GA engine available as of now, but you are more than welcome to try it out on SkySQL, where you can deploy multiple nodes with just one click and then get an expand cluster running, and you can test the performance, how that works. And similarly, if you are an enterprise customer, you can simply download the 10.5 enterprise version and then get this enterprise expand as a storage engine option, right? So you can do that. ARIA engine basically is the modern version of MyISM, so we don't really need to talk much about it, but these are the engines that are available. And most of the time you will be using InnoDB, Myrox, column store, spider or expand. So ARIA is basically being used at the moment as internal tables that MariaDB uses. Like for example, if you look at MySQL schema, so ARIA is basically running internal tables using ARIA engine. Moving forward, more reasons to adopt MariaDB, of course, is the replication capability that is already provided you by default. So we don't need to buy any additional components to get replication support. So so the default one is, of course, asynchronous replication, where MariaDB replicate the data to its replicas or slave nodes asynchronously by default. And then the slaves are the one who basically request for data from the master or from the primary node constantly. So using asynchronous, of course, there are some positive and there are some negatives. That if your transaction is very high, transaction throughput is very high, and then your tables are not properly tuned, then your slaves can lag behind a bit, right? So similarly, to cater or to handle those scenarios, we can basically go to parallel replication instead of a single threaded replication. There are options available to implement parallel replication, where multiple threads can basically process your data that is coming from the master node and then apply those threads in parallel to your slaves to basically cater for your replication lag, to minimize your application lag. So asynchronous is great for read scaling. So meaning you can add more and more nodes to your cluster without impacting your transaction throughput. But of course, we can already see like there's a chance that your slaves can lag behind in case your throughput is very high or your tables are not optimized properly. Talking about automatic failover, yeah. So this one is we are looking at max scale. I think we saw max scale in our first set of slides, where we saw the max scale is one of the components that is provided by MariaDB. When you buy a subscription, then you get max scale for free. So max scale basically is a proxy that handles your backend cluster, and it's basically hides your backend complexity from your front-end clients, right? From your application clients. So your application, they just know that they need to connect to max scale. They don't need to worry about the backend cluster. You have one master and many slaves, that doesn't matter. Or you have a 10 node column store cluster, or you have a 64 node expand cluster. So your clients don't need to worry about all that complexity. So they just simply connect to max scale, and then max scale handles all your connectivity to the backend server, and all your load balancing will be handled by max scale itself. So what happens, max scale has this capability of automatic failover and transaction replay and a lot of great features. So those probably we can go through in detail in some other sessions, but not today. So just looking at a very high level. So if let's say your master node goes down, like in this picture, we have a node failure, master node failure. So what max scale will do, max scale will automatically promote one of the nodes from the remaining cluster as a new master, right? So it will do all that automatically and then join this slave to this node as a slave. And then your application will not even know what happened in the backend. And then your application will just simply continue to use the databases as if nothing happened in the backend, right? So this is a very powerful feature. And then all your transactions that are being run on this master node, Maxwell will automatically replay those transactions on the new master. So these are some of the very high level capabilities of max scale, but of course the list goes on and on and on, but we are not going to cover all that in this session. Moving forward to synchronous topologies. So Galera cluster is one of them, one of the synchronous topologies, and is mostly used when you demand very high level of availability of the servers and of the cluster. So Galera cluster is of course all master nodes. So all the nodes are master. There is no master slave concept here. So all the nodes are master. It's a multi-master infrastructure or a setup where max scale of course does database or does your load balancing across the cluster. So max scale will make sure that your queries are routed appropriately to the node's requirement. And then looking at various architecture deployments, we have this master Galera cluster that can be deployed across multiple data centers. Like the most common deployment is 3 data centers, but if you have 2 data centers, that is still achievable. So you can deploy on 2 or more data centers for high availability and active setup, right? So you can have both sides as active, and then you can literally use your max scale to connect to this cluster and then do transaction from both sides without having any sort of conflicts or any broken replication and all that. Talking about synchronous application going forward, we have expand cluster, which, as we mentioned, is currently in tech preview stage, or rather in a beta version. So expand is literally for scaling your database to extreme limits, millions and millions of transactions per second, many number of nodes. So adding more nodes, removing nodes is very easy without impacting your cluster. Data load balancing, your max scale can make use of all the nodes at the same time. So your application will just simply connect to max scale, and max scale will do a round robin of the transaction on all the different nodes, right? So it's literally using all the nodes at the same time. Unlike Galera cluster max scale will use only one node for writing, while the other nodes are being used for reading. But in an expand deployment, you can have 64 node cluster or maybe 120 node cluster, it doesn't matter. So your max scale can literally use all of those nodes for load balancing. So you can see the power that this will give you. And of course, all the nodes are going to be consistent at one given time. And it has fault tolerance built in. It has automatic data sharding, of course. So your data is distributed and sharded automatically for you. You don't need to worry about sharding your database for high availability and performance. And it does take care of data rebalancing and all that stuff. And so again, this is for another session where we can have a deep dive in these architectures, but just to give you what is available right now out of the box in MariaDB expand cluster. So now we can move forward to the migration methodologies. So how do you migrate your database from your existing database, that can be anything like other than MariaDB, of course, to MariaDB? So looking at a very high level process, of course, the first thing that you should start is assessment, right? So you need to assess your current database, whether is it really a good candidate of migration in the first place or not, or how much effort is required to migrate that database to MariaDB, right? So that is something that we need to start with. Then, of course, once the assessment is done, and then we have finalized that the database is a good candidate for migration, then we will proceed and go ahead with the schema migration, meaning we migrate all the database objects from MariaDB to of course, so from Oracle to MariaDB, of course. And then, of course, you need to worry about, or you need to take care about your application code migration as well, because your application code might be using the syntax for Oracle or for, let's say, MS SQL Server, because that has a very specific syntax for query writing. So your code might be using that syntax for those queries. So your application code will be impacted, of course. So we need to worry about that part as well. So you need to make sure that the application code migration is also done. It's not only database migration, but of course your application code migration, your infrastructure migration, all the interface migration as well. And then, of course, we need to take care of the data replication or data migration itself. So over here, we already done the schema migration, meaning we have already created all the objects, all the stored procedure, everything over to the other side. Then we will take care of the data migration. And then, of course, once the data migration is done, then we need to do quality assurance or QA. So this is super important to make sure like whatever was working on your Oracle is now also working successfully on your MariaDB migrated database. And then, of course, once the QA is done, everything is good, you get a green signal, then you will do a cutover, right? So we are going to move forward and take a quick look at various of these steps. So talking about more about the migration itself, so it's not really just a 1 or 2 man show. So this has to be a project, right? This has to be a complete project on its own, because there's no magic button or magic bullet or magic tool that can literally migrate your database with just one click. So you really need to spend time and effort and resources to get the migration done successfully. If you want to get a migration done successfully, it has to be done as a team, right? It's not a 1 or 2 man show. It can never be. So you need to involve your existing database DBAs, like for example, your Oracle DBAs should be involved, because they are the one who are going to give you all the important details or all the schema level details. And then, of course, you need to have your MariaDB DBA who will come in and who will do the assessment, and who will basically be the one helping with the migration of at least the backend database. Then you need to have involvement of your project managers, like the project manager should be involved, of course, in a project. You need to have your system administrator who is going to basically provision your servers, provision your MariaDB servers, provision the file system, necessary file system and all that. So sysadmin are required. And of course, application development, app developers are a must, because as we know that there will be a case, 99% there's a requirement that the application code needs to be modified, right? So the app developer must be there, and product owner should be there. If it's a third-party product that you are migrating, that the product owner should be there, should be a part of that team. And of course, the QA should be there as well, because they are the one who are going to eventually QA your migrated database to ensure that everything works fine. So talking about the first phase is the inventory and assessment, right? So inventory assessment is something super important that we want to do. So we want to examine the schema, the procedures, the actual data that sits on the Oracle or whatever database you're migrating from, and your different workloads that are going to run on the database. And then, of course, your system and database statistics, like how many users are connected and what type of queries are they running, what are the transactions per second that you expect. All those things we need to assess. Schema, procedure, and data migration being the most important ones that we want to do. So once that assessment is done, the questionnaire is also a part of the assessment. So you need to have a set of important questions that you want to ask before migration, right? So those are related to your workloads, your statistics requirement. And then you can also have some automated scripts that can do the evaluation for us or assessment for us. I will show you, or I will tell you what options are available for those automated assessment available. And then if you talk about the assessment itself, of course, you need to get the database schemas and get the actual data out. So when you have a successful assessment, that successful assessment will lead us to create a successful plan for executing our migration project, right? And then, of course, if you have an assessment done properly, then it will also help us mitigate possible risks, right? So you cannot just simply jump into direct migration without any assessment. Then you don't know what are the possible risks that you might end up having. So having a successful assessment is super important. And then, of course, assessment will also help us narrowing the scope of our applications that we want to migrate. So it's not going to be all the apps are not really always a good candidate for migration. So assessment will tell us whether this particular app that you are assessing is a good candidate for migration. We will see that in the next few slides, exactly what I'm talking about. So taking a quick look at the assessment, right, like the tools that are available. So at the moment, MariaDB is working very closely with SQL Lines. So SQL Lines is one of the open source migration tool that is available. So you can literally have a Oracle dump, like Oracle schema.sql or Oracle dump created from your Oracle database, and then you can just simply pass in that Oracle dump into the SQL Lines interface, and then you can say that my target -t is for target. My target is going to be MariaDB Aura, and -a is for assessment, right? So all these parameters, basically, you can just simply literally, once you have downloaded this SQL Lines, you can run this command line to basically generate a very nice looking report in HTML format. And that will basically give you a very detailed report to tell you what will work and what will not work, or what are the things that you might need to change in your Oracle schema or in your store procedures. And basically, this is your first line of assessment. So this is super important to be done. So this will already tell you if it is worth migrating, or is it easy, or is it hard, or is it impossible to migrate, right? So those are the things that you will be able to handle by that. And then there is another tool available on the MariaDB website, customers.mariadb.com. So if you are a MariaDB corporate customer, MariaDB enterprise customer already, you can go to this URL. It has a very nice looking UI that is newly developed and it basically uses SQL Lines in the backend. So it has the option of assessing not only Oracle, but it can let you assess your SQL Server, your Sci-based databases, or your Informix databases, or your MySQL database schemas, and then it can generate the similar report for you. And yeah, it has a lot more capabilities available, or options available. Identifying the migration candidate. Okay, so because we have already done the assessment, so assessment will lead us to identifying which application or which of your current apps is a better fit for migration, right? So apps that fit better Of course, if you have source code available, that is the first requirement, that your source code should be available, because there are 99.99% chances that you will need to modify your source code. So if you don't even have the source code, then you can forget about migrating that database to Oracle, to MariaDB from Oracle or any other database. And then you need to see that the application stack that is currently running on like Java or C or Python, because those documents are those things are well documented, and then the interface is well established. So those communication with those apps shouldn't be a problem at all. And then if, let's say, your app is a third party product which is being handled by a vendor, not by you, then if your vendor, as long as your vendor is neutral to that, to the migration, is okay with migrating your database or your app to MariaDB, then that's also a good fit. And then, of course, your application development team is available. So if you have no application development team available, then also it's not a good candidate for that database, or that app is not a good candidate for that. So similarly, in contrast to this, the apps that are not fit for migration, again, of course, no source code available, you can already forget about migrating that database. And then also, if you have a third-party integrated database that is, like, for example, SharePoint or SAP or maybe Oracle apps, so those because the source code is, of course, not your property. So you will, of course, SharePoint or SAP or Oracle apps will not let you modify their source code to connect to a MariaDB server. So that's, again, it's not a good candidate for that. And then if, let's say, you have many interfaces for that app that are connected to external sources, and then you don't have any documentation available on those. So those are, again, some things that is a red flag already, that you need to make sure that you don't have such a case. So all the documentation should be available. And then, of course, lastly, you should have a development team available, right? So the development team is, again, going to be super important if you want to have a successful migration. Without a dev team, you will have a very, very hard time migrating, because the application code will need to be converted as well. So looking at the tools that are available, so this is interesting. So automated schema, automated conversion of schema objects can be done through various tools. Semantic DS and Semantic DS Pro is one of the tools. Then Blitz, SQL lines, and then, of course, if you're migrating on AWS, you can make use of AWS SCT tool. dbeaver is available, is also possible, is also one of the candidates that can do schema conversions at basically your database object, like tables and your views and all that. And of course, there are a lot more tools, but most of the common one that we recommend is Semantic DS, Blitz, and SQL lines. Talking about the source code, source code is a tricky one, because source code may require some development efforts. So source code are not going to be able to migrate as it is, even though we have Oracle compatibility, for example, it does support PLSQL databases, but it's not going to be able to migrate your database without any single modification or without any single development effort. So it will make the migration a bit easier, but it's, like I mentioned earlier, there's no magic button or a magic tool that can just one click migrate your database to MariaDB. So you're still always going to have to do some manual effort, right? And then, of course, once you have migrated that, you need to make sure that you test properly, you do trial and error, test properly all the things, and in and out testing. So whatever you are expecting to pass in to those procedures and whatever expected output that you're supposed to get, you should be able to, you should be testing all that to make sure that everything works as it is. So for migration, there are various ways, of course, and one of the most popular way is setting up replication, right? So Semantic DS is basically one of the most common one that we use. So Semantic DS, Blitz, MySQL replication where applicable. If, let's say, you're migrating from MySQL database to MariaDB, you can literally set up MariaDB as a slave to MySQL and then replicate all the data over to that. So that will get your migration done. And then, of course, if you dare, you can use Oracle Golden Gate for the replication. And then, of course, there's Tungsten as well. So all these things, all those options are available. So it's just a matter of your preference, but the recommended ones are Semantic DS and Blitz. And of course, for MySQL migration, you can use the native replication itself. Quality assurance, talking about the final process, quality assurance, of course. So once, let's say, your migration is done, everything is over, then you can literally start the QA processes. So again, many things to test, of course, depending on how complex is your database. So ensure that your source code works with after the migration and after the code modification. You can do checksums of your databases and tables to verify, to make sure that whatever checksum was there on the source is also available on the target. And then, of course, you can do count verification or smoke testing to make sure that your apps, whatever functions were working before migration, are also working after migration. So again, it all depends on your regression testing to ensure that your migration is not only database migration. Of course, you need to make sure your app migration is also done, your infrastructure migration is also done, and all the interfaces that were supposed to be working prior to migration are also working. But it looks like a daunting task, and believe me, it's not easy. But once you have migrated over, the lives get easy, much easier, and then, of course, you save a ton of money. So cutover. Finally, once the QA is done, then we, of course, we go ahead and do the cutover, and then we need to make sure that we set up a proper rollback plan, right? So there can be a scenario where your cutover is successful for now, but in maybe after a week or so, then you identify some serious issue that was not captured during the QA or during your testing. Then you want to make sure that you have a rollback plan established, right? So this for the rollback plan, we would recommend to use Blitz or SQL or Symmetric DS Pro. So Symmetric DS Pro is something, or Blitz is something that is able to set up a replication from your migrated database back to your traditional database. Like, for example, if you're migrating out of Oracle, so we can set a replication from MariaDB to Oracle, right? So that's something very powerful and can be done through Blitz and Symmetric DS. So Symmetric DS can literally replicate or capture your data changes in your MariaDB and then replicate back to Oracle. So that will make sure that your Oracle database or your ancient database is also kept up to date. Whatever you're doing on your MariaDB is also kept up to date over there. And then, let's say, due to some reason, God forbid, you have some serious issue, and then you want to fall back to Oracle, and then you can literally switch your connections back to Oracle and then have it running with all the data already in sync, right? Again, so you will have to go through those life cycle again one more time and make sure that all the problems that you faced after this cutover, you fixed it and you do the modification, necessary changes, and then you finally do the switchover, right? So that's something important to take note of. But there are various options available for a successful fallback plan or successful rollback plan, which is again going to be super critical for any of the migrations that you want to do. Different tools, like I mentioned earlier, for different tools available for your replication setup is MariaDB to MySQL replication, binlog based replication is there. And then Blitz is also available, is a paid tool, but that can do data change capture or CDC from your MariaDB to Oracle and Oracle to MariaDB. So both way replication is supported. Similarly, Symmetric DS Pro is also a paid one that also captures your data based on some triggers in the database and is also able to do replication from your MariaDB to Oracle and also from Oracle back to MariaDB. So both way replications are supported by both of these tools. So super important, and I think worth investing in if you want to have a successful life cycle or successful migration project. So finally, looking at the Oracle compatibility mode that Fred talked about earlier in the slides when we mentioned that DBS is the one who basically made this possible. So it's as simple as setting your SQL mode equals to Oracle or MS SQL or Postgres or DB2, right? So these options are available right now. So you can set, but Oracle being the most matured one at the moment, MS SQL, Postgres, and DB2 are still not that matured, but still they will give you some basic compatibility. Like, for example, MS SQL will give you the compatibility of being able to read your MS SQL TSQL queries, because if you know, MS SQL has a very specific way of writing SQL statements. So with this mode set, your apps will be, or database will be able to understand those queries. But Oracle, if you look at Oracle mode, this was introduced in MariaDB 10.3 with the help of DBS, of course, and make available publicly with the release of 10.3, of course. So just setting your SQL mode to Oracle, with that, you should be able to migrate your 60 to 70% of stored procedures from Oracle to MariaDB without any changes. But of course, with that 70% or with that 40 to 50% of the code, you will still need to do some manual intervention and modify your source code to be able to run on MariaDB itself. So to identify the things that will work and that don't work in this SQL mode. So here's a Jira that is officially created to track those things. Of course, those compatibility gaps are being filled as we speak, and they are basically captured here and tracked by this particular Jira. Right. So moving forward, before MariaDB 10.3, when you set SQL mode to Oracle, so you will still get a very basic level of compatibility. Like you get, meaning MariaDB will be able to understand your pipe symbol as a concatenation symbol. And then, of course, it will replace this tilde with a double quotes that is available or that is supported by Oracle. It does have check constraints supported Oracle already before 10.3. And of course, it will also be able to understand the NC outer join syntax when you have this SQL mode to Oracle. But with 10.3, it was, of course, enhanced a lot more. So now it is able to understand all the Oracle data types like varchar2, number, date time, raw, clob, and blob. So all those data types are now understood by MariaDB. So you can literally copy your table creation DDL from Oracle and then set SQL mode to Oracle on MariaDB and just simply compile or create that table in your database. And then it will let you through, let it through, because it's now able to understand all these data types by default. And then, of course, talking about the stored procedure side of compatibility or PLSQL side of that compatibility. So you can literally set the session at the session level, set the SQL mode to Oracle, and then just create your PLSQL package from Oracle, right? So you can just simply create the Oracle package within that particular session. So you don't need to set this globally. You can still set it globally, but if you just want to migrate some of the tables or some of the packages from Oracle, you can just simply set this at the session level and then create those objects and those procedures or those packages without worrying about that in the future. So whenever you call that procedure, MariaDB will know that this is an Oracle package, so it will enable Oracle compatibility for executing that package, and then just simply trigger it without you need to switching between Oracle and NC mode. So you don't need to worry about that at all. That's all I have for today. So I think we probably are already at the end of the hour of our presentation. So I will pass it back to Hemant for the final words.
Sure. Thank you very much, Faisal. That was quite a lot that you have covered in the limited time. We have a lot of queries that is coming up. I think one of the question was someone seemed to have joined a bit late on who are the customers which have done Oracle to MariaDB migration in past. So as Fred had a couple of slides in the beginning, the leading light, I would say, would be the DBS Bank in Singapore, which has migrated, as per my knowledge, approximately 1,500 Oracle databases, including some of their mission critical applications like payment gateway of DBS Bank, which used to run on Oracle RAC before, which is now running on MariaDB Enterprise. That is, I would say, one of the first. And DBS Bank was the one to actually contribute the PLSQL or the Oracle compatibility within MariaDB engine. Other than that, there are some customers we cannot name for confidentiality reasons, but we do have banks in Malaysia where we have recently completed this exercise, migrated the Oracle RAC to MariaDB Enterprise, including some of these Oracle date and time formats, as well as blob and clob data, etc. So there are quite a few customers in different segments. In auto industry, one of the customers Fred mentioned, which migrated from SQL Server to to MariaDB. So these are some of the customer names that we can share, some of which we cannot because of confidentiality reasons. Now I do have one question. How about triggers, Faisal? So the Oracle triggers, will they be supported as is into MariaDB, or will
Yes, with the compatibility module, Oracle triggers are supported as well, but probably not all of the functionality may be supported, as I mentioned earlier. So we may need to still end up having some of the development effort in converting some of the specific syntax that is currently not supported.
Right. So some of the, thanks for the answer, some of the inputs or maybe setting the expectations right for the audience. This is not a dump and load exercise that you can simply take a backup of Oracle, load it into MariaDB. Based on our exercise experience, we do take anywhere between 1 to 3 months, depending upon the complexity of the application as well as database. It might take a month, it might take 2, or it might take as well 3 months. Up to that much of time is required to actually migrate an application from Oracle database to MariaDB. But it's doable. There are customers who have done it already, including the banks, as I just mentioned. It will require a bit of effort, but I guess it will be worth, since the customers have saved a lot of money, which Fred mentioned about the comparison. And yes, there was a question whether the comparison with Oracle Enterprise or with the SE. So I guess the $100,000 versus $9 million was the Oracle Enterprise comparison. Am I right, Fred?
Yep, that's correct.
Right. So why we compare, and yes, there is a link. We will share this recording. There is a link within that slide which can actually take you to a very lengthy TCO white paper. I think it's been about like 3 years old, and Oracle has not contested that calculation till date. So it's based on a publicly available information. Why we compare with Enterprise is very simple, that we can provide the multi-master setup, synchronous replication, where your database can scale to millions of queries and hundreds of thousands of users. That's why the comparison was done with Enterprise. Okay, so there are some questions about license as well. So, over to you, Fred. How does the licensing works both for OLTP as well as for OLAP?
So the licensing or the subscription is based on number of instances. So in that sense that, for example, if you do not need any high availability, you can run on just one server, and the subscription will be based on one server. If you want to do things like replication, minimum you need at least 2. So you need to subscribe for 2 subscription. And then for clustering 3, and then for expand 3, and so on. So the pricing will very much varies depend on what is the different type of high availability that you're looking for. But it's more or less somewhere around the same.
Right. So to sum up, it's basically a per instance per year price, right? It's an annual subscription, and MariaDB does not calculate on how much memory do you have in that instance or how many core that you assign to that instance. Right, Fred?
Yep, that's correct.
Right. All right. How about the performance tuning, Faisal?
Yes. So talking about the performance tuning, of course, there are many tools available. So like traditionally in Oracle, you have explain plan, then you can create indexes, of course, and then you can get the database level tuning. So there are many parameters available to tune your different workloads. And of course, every engine will have its own specific performance tuning requirements. Like for example, for InnoDB, there's a separate set of server variables that you can tune. Of course, if you're talking about basic query tuning, then of course those are indexes and primary keys and composite indexes. Those are of course available. But then the more important one is your server tuning, so that your server is able to give you the throughput that you're looking for, like the transaction per second is able to give you. So every engine will have its own set of parameters, set of memory parameters, set of IO related parameters. So those you can configure and tune depending on your infrastructure and your hardware, of course.
Right. Thank you very much. Right. Let me just see if there are any more question that we need to address? There are quite a lot. I think we have some of them. Yeah.
Herman, there is one. I mean, there's one. I think has been asked several times. I think why customers choose Oracle against MariaDB? Why do they migrate to MariaDB? I think we have mentioned several times. Primarily, cost is a big factor, especially if you look at today's IT budget. I think for everyone it is continuously shrinking, but requesting for more and more capabilities, while the IT management do not want to pay more and instead want to reduce it by sometimes 30% for the rest of the year, and every following year they want to reduce the cost. So a couple of reasons I want to share with everyone as to why a lot of the customers have gone down the MariaDB route. Okay, and these are I think important. One of it is open source. What does it mean by being open source is a very key point. Open source basically means that you are able to use the software if you decide that you do not want to pay for it, and that's very important point. That means that the company cannot ask you to stop using or rip it off just because you have previously subscribed to MariaDB. Okay, that's one of it. And if, let's just say, tomorrow somebody has a lot of experience in maintaining MariaDB, they have what you call by engineers who are able to fix, who are able to enhance MariaDB. You as a customer can also choose to subscribe to a different provider. Okay, so all the reasons for open source, and there's a lot more, but these are some of it. Okay, that's one of the reasons why they moved to MariaDB. Another reason is MariaDB is available for you on-premise and in the cloud. And that's a very important criteria, because most customers does not want to get tied in and explore more and more reasons to move to the cloud. They don't have to just go to Oracle Cloud, because, like, for example, if you use Oracle, I would say that 9 times out of 10, you have no choice but to go to the Oracle Cloud. Here, you can decide, almost every cloud provider today has MariaDB as a database service, right? And not only that, if you decide that you want somebody to manage your MariaDB cloud instead of a cloud provider, MariaDB also offers SkySQL, which is running on Google Cloud Platform today, but it's going to be available on Amazon and Azure probably before the end of the year and in the beginning of next year. So in that sense, you are also able to run either on-premise, move to the cloud. You have a lot of flexibility. Okay. And one of the things that I think we did not say very much about, which I think Faisal did allude a little bit to, is the ability to run on containers. Many of the customers that we have today, because they are innovating, because they are looking at a lot of the so-called internet companies, the key criteria is to be able to run a database in container, like, for example, Kubernetes or Dockers and etc. You are not able to do that with Oracle. Imagine trying to start a container running Oracle, which is, I would say, almost impossible, right? MariaDB has that certified on Dockers. You're able to download that, you're able to run, and I can tell you from experience, literally you can spin up a MariaDB database in like literally seconds, okay? And that's some of the technology that we use on the cloud, on our cloud too. So if you look at innovation, you look at cost, you look at the reason why MariaDB is there, I would say that there's not much reasons for people not to choose MariaDB over the likes of Oracle. Sorry, there's a little bit long-winded, but there's been a couple of questions asked about that.
Insight, Fred. And I think, yeah, because of because of the lack of time, we couldn't, of course, include a lot of things. So like MariaDB does have built-in backups, monitoring tools that MariaDB provides, etc. So it's a complete package that you actually get, not just the database engine. And coming back to our topic of today for the Oracle compatibility and the migration. A lot of customers are onboarding. Of course, it does require a bit of work, professional services to basically assess and prepare a strategy. But I guess, as Fred mentioned, it's worth the money to actually explore that route. For simple reason is that the TCO or the return of investment, rather the ROI, is pretty impressive. Is why a lot of customers like DBS Bank or some of the banks in Malaysia or the auto company in Europe and several others have actually gone down that route. You can break the buckles of the proprietary licensing, go open source, still work, make your application work with the RDBMS is what all you need. And the PLSQL code, the store procedures, the package, the functions, the trigger, etc. I think in our experience, maybe about 70% or maybe more can be out of box supported. Maybe for the rest 20 to 30%, there may be a workaround requirement for which our team of experts can help you through and make it work. That's what something that we specialize in. So I think with that, we will conclude today's session. Any last word from your side, Fred or Faisal?
No, I do hope if you guys are interested, please let us know. As Faisal mentioned, I think migration requires commitment and requires understanding. This is just a preview of it. We hope to be able to engage with you more. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Yeah, so you have the contact details on your screen. You have the Singapore number, the Malaysia number, as well as the India number, and then you have an email ID. So if you are based out of different countries as well, we do have customers. My bad. We do have customers in the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. So feel free to reach out to us to know more on how you can possibly get started on this journey, and we will be happy to share more. The recording of this webinar will be provided. We will email the link to you hopefully in next 24 to 48 hours. You can watch this webinar again, share with the others as you need. And if you have more queries, you want to know more, get in touch with us. We'll be happy to help. So thank you very much, everyone, once again for your time today. We look forward to see you again in the next webinar, maybe to talk a bit more about MaxScale and the security capabilities of MariaDB as well, on how it can actually be a secure database for your enterprise. Thank you.